listed on the sheet as Jeff's mentor, and that's the wrong word. The word mentor comes from the Odyssey. It's the name of a character. And mentor guided Telemachus in his search for his father. I did not guide Jeff in his search for the iPad. The only word that I can come up with is this horribly cliched phrase used too often in business school, a place that I hope you end up someday, that kind of makes you vomit in your mouth when you hear it. It's thought partner. And I truly was Jeff's thought partner. I looked forward to every single meeting that we had together. I got to brainstorm about what the future of the textbook could look like, and he ran with it. And I'm looking forward to seeing this. Hand it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. For the last 4 months, I've designed and created one chapter of an iPad interactive textbook in U.S. history. Now, coming into my senior project, there were 2 things I wanted to get out of it, and really the same 2 things that I expected. One was a great experience in engineering and computer science. The other was a great experience in design. And when you're talking about the iPad, you're talking about a device that does these 2 things in conjunction with one another better than any other device in its class. So I wasn't necessarily expecting one thing followed by the other. I was expecting both of them together, engineering and design together. And I thought this would be the most rewarding part of my process. Now, it was very rewarding, but it wasn't the most rewarding. I spent a total of 4 months working on my senior project. The first 3 months I spent figuring out how to program for the iPad, figuring out the software side. And the final month was the really fun part, when engineering and design came together. That was when I had my historical text that would become the text of my actual textbook. And I knew about the software enough to bring them together. So making interactive features that are filled with great content that would become the skeleton of my application. But there was one thing I never expected. I didn't see it coming. I found myself in the middle of this impending revolution, this wave of innovation waiting to happen. And that's the iPad revolution in the classroom. This device is only a year old, but it has the potential to revolutionize completely the landscape of education in our country from the ground up. And if we start putting it in students' hands, we're empowering them to learn the best way that they possibly can. Today, I want to share a little bit of my enthusiasm with you that I developed in finding myself in the middle of this revolution. Because it's one of the greatest causes I've ever been a part of. And I'm proud that even in my small way, my app has contributed to this wave that's going to start the revolution. So today I want to share with you my vision for the future of the textbook. There are 4 things I want to talk about. The first is the conventional textbook model, the one that has existed for decades, the one that everyone in this room has used at one point or another. I don't think anyone can remember using any other method of learning in the classroom than a textbook. This method's stale, and it's time for it to change. The second thing I want to talk about is the iPad textbook model. I'm going to talk about 2 companies that are in the space right now making iPad interactive textbooks and the challenges they're facing as they try to get their content to market. Third is the most important one. It's the economics behind iPad adoption. I'm going to answer the question, is it economically advantageous in the long run for a public school district to adopt the iPad instead of the current paper textbook format? Finally, and most exciting, is my app, which is called The Revolution. I'm going to demo it for you, but before that I'll give you a little bit of a look as to my development process that's behind it. Like I said, I want to share with you my vision for the future of the textbook, and these are the 4 things I'm going to talk about. Let's get started. First, I want to share with you 3 of my friends. First, we've got Vicky. Vicky's a visual learner. She sits in the front of the class because she likes to see up close exactly what she's learning. She takes notes on what the teacher's saying, what her classmates are saying, and what's going through her head. She takes notes on everything. Next, we've got Andy. In case you can't see, he's wearing headphones. He's our classic auditory learner. He internalizes things by vocalizing them to himself, either in his head or actually out loud. He loves explaining things to other people. He also loves hearing those same things explained back to him. That's how he learns best. Finally, we've got Kenny. He's using a computer because he's a kinesthetic learner. He likes touching things and feeling things. He likes dragging a slider, pressing a button. His favorite way of learning is actually making flashcards because the mere action of seeing his hand animated in 3-dimensional space to reveal content, that's what fires his neurons in the best way. That's how he learns. So why am I telling you about these 3 people? Let's have a quick survey. Of everyone in the room, how many would consider yourself a visual learner? Auditory. And kinesthetic. That's about accurate. According to the most recent research, 60 to 65% of Americans are visual learners, and I think it was even more than that from the people who raised their hands. The textbook model works if you're Vicky the visual learner. If you think about a textbook, it's images and text displayed in one way or another. But at the end of the day, Andy and Kenny are completely left behind by the current textbook. A textbook will never talk to Andy, it will never play sound, and it will never give Kenny something to touch and feel. So auditory learners and kinesthetic learners are left in the dust by the current textbook model. That's the current textbook model, and that was the first thing I wanted to tell you about today. Naturally, the second thing I'll talk to you about is the iPad interactive textbook model. I'd like to tell you about two companies that are in the space right now. The first of which is QandA. They were all over the news in February of last year because they had just signed deals with McGraw-Hill, with Pearson, and with John Wiley & Sons, three of the foremost textbook developers in this country. The other company is Inkling. Now, Inkling actually has dozens of titles right now, and if you add up all their titles that are available, plus the ones that are in development, they've got about 100. So to go back to like I said, they were all over the news, and if you look on their website, they've still got textbooks in development with no actual titles, and that's understandable, because both of these companies face a slew of challenges in getting their content to market. One of these is state adoption. If you're a school administrator at a school district, even if you're the biggest iPad enthusiast in the world, you can't just snap your fingers and adopt the iPad at any given school. You have to go higher up and get approval at the state level. Now, if you think about all your conceptions of state politicians, obviously there's a lot of bureaucracy, there's a lot of red tape. They need to see concrete evidence that this is a robust market. And the fact is, it's not a robust market yet. I'm talking about Inkling and These are the two most prominent companies in the interactive textbook space, and frankly, there aren't many others. That's because A, the iPad is only about a year old, and B, it's hard to get this content out. It's hard to get the content from the McGraw-Hills of the world, and it's hard to find the right people to publish it. The next issue, I'm not going to talk about this one too much, is copyright law, and I found out a little bit about this during my presentation. However, it's hard when you're using someone else's content to avoid a lot of the legal issues like fair use and intellectual property. So suffice it to say that it's difficult and there are a lot of issues surrounding it. Third, this is a crucial one. The market's underdeveloped right now. Like I said, these are two of the foremost companies making interactive textbooks, but there aren't many more. Furthermore, if you add up all the titles they have, there aren't that many. Now, the good thing about this is the only place to go is up from here. Once there are more competitors in the next couple of years, there are going to be more competitors in this space. When the free market takes over, naturally prices are going to be driven down, and the quality of the content is going to be driven up. To go back to the first point, if you're someone at the state level looking for that concrete evidence, you're going to see it in a couple of years because the market is going to be more robust. There's going to be more evidence that the iPad model indeed works. Finally, this is probably the most important one, is the fusion teams required at a company like Inkling, a company like You can't give a team of engineers a bunch of historical content and expect them to make beautiful interactive features out of it. What I learned during my app was that you really have to be doing both at once. I had my historical text and I had to review the content in order to make the best features that were filled with that content. So like I said, say the engineers are asked to make an interactive feature about the Declaration of Independence. They're looking through the list of signers and they see two names. One of them is Button Gwinnett and one of them is John Hancock. Now if you've taken history, you'll know that John Hancock is a heck of a lot more famous than Button Gwinnett. But how can you expect those engineers to do all that research if their full-time job is engineering? And that happens in chapter after chapter after chapter. They simply don't have the time to do that. And the converse is true. If you look at the Pearsons, the John Wiley & Sons, the McGraw-Hills, they're giving you the content, but they don't speak the same language as the engineers. What you need is someone who's in the middle, a fusion team, so to speak. That's the word I'm using for it, who can speak both languages, people who have their feet in both doors, who can make the communication happen, and then you can start getting the content to market. That's the iPad model. That was the second thing I wanted to tell you about. Third, a little bit of an economics lesson. This is an economics textbook. It's available in its paper version. That's its price, $153.94. On Inkling, which sells all textbooks as whole textbooks or by the chapter, its price is $109.99. That's almost $45 less. And this is for an understandable reason. In fact, I looked at 12 books that were on Inkling. The average price reduction was 29% from the paper textbook to the Inkling textbook. And that's because Inkling simply doesn't have to pay for the cost of printing and the cost of shipping. So now, pretend you're that school administrator again. What are you thinking about? First and foremost, you're thinking about the enormous upfront cost you're incurring if you're adopting the iPad model. You've got to buy 30 or 40 of these devices per class. You've got one device per kid, and they cost several $100s. That's an enormous upfront cost. And if you're looking in the short term, it's not going to look financially advantageous to switch over to this model, regardless of the learning advantages. The key here is the long-term textbook savings. If you're looking at the long term, the savings, that 29%, is going to add up over the years. Furthermore, the iPad textbook represents a one-time purchase. The average lifespan of the paper textbook is about 5 years. That means every 5 years, school districts have to repurchase all these books because their condition is degrading. An iPad textbook is digital, it never degrades. Once you buy it once, even if you're upgrading your device, if you have the iPad 2, you upgrade to the iPad 3, to the 4, that textbook follows you along. You bought it once and you have it no matter which device you're using. So those savings add up in the long term and actually make the iPad financially advantageous to adopt if you're looking in the long term. And I have a handout I made that's about 4 pages long of all the numbers and number crunching that led me to these conclusions. So I don't have enough time to talk about it now, but I'd love to share it with you afterward. I've got a bunch of copies. Those are the economics. That was the third thing I wanted to talk about. The fourth thing, of course, is my app. Now this is the one thing I said I wasn't going to do. I said I wasn't going to show code. Hopefully you can't see too much of it because it's pretty ugly. But this is about 1/30th of one of the 150 files that I was working with in my program. So that can give you a sense of how much code goes into about 34 pages of text, which is how long my textbook is. Next, thank you to Stephen Mintz. He's a professor at Columbia University. He was the one who let me use his text. If I didn't have text, I wouldn't have a textbook. So I emailed him, and he agreed to let me use the text from his online textbook, which is called Digital History. Next, I'd like to talk about 2 of the features I would implement in my ideal app. That means if I had more manpower, more time, more money to produce this app for real. One of these is social highlighting. This is an awesome feature. Picture turning on social highlighting if you're a student in an AP US history class. Your teacher assigns you one section of homework and tells you, turn on social highlighting. You press the button and all of a sudden your finger's the highlighter. Any text you drag over is highlighted. The application keeps track of which text is highlighted by each student in the class. If enough students are highlighting the same text, say over 20 of them, it's going to give a faint underline under that text for everyone to see. So you're doing your homework and you can see a faint underline under things that most people in your class are highlighting. Now this is a huge social advantage for the students. That's social learning at its finest. But the kicker is picturing it from the teacher's perspective. You're a teacher sitting at home, you've assigned your class this nightly reading, you're sitting at home watching this data get compiled in real time. You can adjust your lesson plan for the next day based on what students have failed to highlight that should have been highlighted, what they highlighted that maybe they errantly highlighted. You can adjust your lesson plan based on exactly what each student is doing. That's really powerful. Another thing along this vein is the debate forum. This is another feature I would add if I had time. Basically, the application can ask a debate question. Who is a modern Paul Revere? Maybe it's a section about Paul Revere, you're trying to link it to current events. Who's a modern Paul Revere? You click a button, you're taken to a forum inside the app where each student can give a response to that question. They can agree or disagree with one another and post constructive criticism. We do a little bit of this at Crystal. Some of our English programs have nightly blogging. This is a very similar function and actually makes it more social. Finally, I'd like to address the issue of expert research. Now, it's hard when the iPad's only a year old. There are no experts in iPad interactive textbook development. So I was thinking about if I'm a company like Inkling, if I'm a company like No, who's the real expert in the field? Well, it's actually the user. The user has the final say on what app is good, what feature is good, and what app is bad, what feature is bad. So I decided I would do a focus group in order to get my expert research, according to the phrase, the user is God, which is especially true if you're a company like Inkling. So I got a focus group of 5 people together. I showed them my initial app. They gave me great feedback. In fact, there was an interactive timeline I had created that I was so confident was going to be the greatest feature in the whole textbook, and they hated it. They told me, Jeff, it's terrible, you have to get rid of it. And so I changed it. I showed it to a second focus group 3 days later. The focus group, the second time, loved the timeline. So I was grateful that I was able to get that feedback, because you don't want to give your users, which in this case is the students, a bad feature. Then you're putting a bad learning tool in the hands of students. And that's exactly what I wanted to avoid. So the real experts in this field, of course, are the users. Now I'd like to show you my app. The metaphor for navigation is simple. You're either swiping left or swiping right to go from one page to another. So we'll get started. This is a classic page. You see the interactive feature at the bottom. All the interactive features are highlighted by this red rectangle. So I can touch any one of these squares to reveal any one of the 5 countries that had contemporary revolutions around the time of the American Revolution. This is called the reveal model because you're the one who's in control of the information. By pressing each button, you're revealing that additional information. And take a look at the microphone at the top of the page. Let's have a look at what that does.
As you learn about the differences between Britain and the colonies, pay attention to the political systems of the North and the South. Why do Britain's country values prevail in some places and not others?
Now picture yourself for a second as Andy the auditory learner. You've been left behind by the traditional textbook model your whole life, and already on page 1 of this app, I think this is really cool, Andy is getting spoken to by the app. It is engaging the best part of his brain that learns in the best way possible. So you just heard Mr. Wadley's voice. This is a feature I call auditory learning objectives. So Mr. Wadley can use the teacher's edition of the app to record his own learning objectives that he wants his students to hear before they start reading. So we'll keep going. Here's another interactive app. It's another reveal model. Again, I'm the one in control of the information. I'm touching North and South to reveal the successful and unsuccessful state constitutions of the North and the South. You're revealing it by touching the buttons. Here's one of my favorite features. This is the quiz section. I can touch any one of these question marks to take the review quiz. Let's say I'll take the second one. In which of the following states did the politics of harmony succeed? I'll open up that quiz. I'm going to go with Virginia, and that's correct. It'll explain why it's correct though. Say I took another question and got it incorrect, it'll tell me why I was incorrect, give an explanation. And at the bottom you can see it keeps track of your correct and incorrect answers. You can press the reset button to take it again with your scores at 0. Now this arrow here represents an explorable image. I'm going to click on it. It's opening up a larger view of Paul Revere's engraving of the Boston Massacre, which happened on March 5th, 1770. Now, this image is famous for its historical inaccuracies. The blue squares here represent points of interest in the image. I can click any one of these blue squares, and the dynamic caption box down below will display the hidden information associated with that point of interest. I can scroll through all 3 of them. We'll go back to the main app. Here we've got another reveal model. Again, picture using this as a textbook instead of the paper counterpart. You're not being dictated this text. You're exploring number 1, 2, 3, finding out the principles behind the war for yourself instead of someone explaining it to you. You're the one in control. Most people would enjoy being in control of the information they're receiving. Here we've got another reveal model. This time it's stacked vertically to emphasize the fact that these are 7 elements, maybe in a bulleted list, of the distinguishing qualities between America and Great Britain. So I can scroll through each one of them to explore the 7 qualities that distinguished America from Britain. Again, you're just touching to reveal information. It's pretty intuitive. Now picture for a second that you're Kenny, the kinesthetic learner. Like I said, he loves using flashcards. These are interactive flashcards that work on the iPad. So Kenny thinks he's hot stuff with his timeline. I'm going to press the bottom, hide all. That's going to get rid of everything. And now, each one of these years is a flashcard. You can press it to reveal the information that happened during that year. So you get 1754 correct. Say you miss 1763, you can press it again to hide. Keep hiding and unhiding until you get it correct, and then you can keep going. Here we've got another explorable image. This one is of the shot heard around the world, the shot that started the American Revolution. Again, you're just touching the blue points of interest to reveal hidden information about the historical content. Here we've got a unique feature. In the Declaration of Independence, the writers enumerated 27 specific complaints they had against King George III of Britain. So I've created a little table where you can press the up or down button to explore these 27 grievances. And for example, say I close the app, I had to do something else on the iPad. I open it back up, I left off on number 5, it comes back on number 5. I go to the previous page, previous 2 pages, it come back, it's still on number 5 because it lets you learn at your own pace. This works well with any kind of learner. If you're visual, if you're auditory, if you're kinesthetic, it lets you learn at your own pace. So I'll reset that. Continuing on, now we've got a historical showcase about the Battle of Yorktown. It's important because it ended the Revolution. There are 5 key things you can learn about: the battle map, the battlefield, trench warfare, the involvement of our allies the French, and the surrender of General Cornwallis. Again, you're just tapping through to reveal that information. Here's the historical debate feature I was talking about. Like I said, I didn't have enough time or obviously manpower to make a forum for debate, but this is an example of maybe I could put an arrow in the top right of this box, you click it, and then you can answer this debate question, take a pro or con stance, and see what your fellow classmates have to say. Here's probably one of my favorite features. This is an explorable map. I'm going to click through the dates on the right, and it's going to add battle lines to the map. So you can see the progression of British forces, of American forces, and finally, the arrival of the French fleet with green lines there. Next, we've got a feature about the Founding Fathers. There are 8 Founding Fathers here. You can touch any one of the thumbnails to blow up the image to a larger size and see a little biography about that person. Finally, we've got another quiz. Again, you can take Any one of these 4 quizzes, it'll explain why you're correct or incorrect, and keep track of your score. Again, I'll reset it. That's the end of my app. I wanted to give you a little bit of a showcase of the interactive features that made me so excited about this revolution. And I hope it's easy to see from this how much of an advantage this will offer students if we can put the right learning tools in their hands. And this is something I've come to care a lot about, so I'm trying to share a little bit of that enthusiasm about this iPad revolution, to try to convince you that this revolution can happen and it will happen if we can put the best learning tools in our students' hands. There's one more thing before you go. Obviously, it's not enough just to see it. I want you to touch and feel it for yourself. So as we're doing question and answer, I've got 6 iPads here I'm going to pass around. They've all got my app, and you can feel free to use it. Thank you very much.